The snowstorm howled wildly, roaring like an enraged beast, sweeping everything away in its chaotic frenzy. A hunter, carrying deep wounds within his soul, stood frozen in the darkness, facing a choice from which there would be no turning back: save a life or let everything slip into oblivion. Each gust of wind sliced through his ears like a cold punch, reminding him that time had run out, and a single wrong decision could erase it all. Before him, a wild horse, exhausted and in agony, its eyes wide with fear, struggled against the deadly cold. It was dying right before his eyes. Save it, or let it sink into the shadows. In the pitch-black darkness, only the sound of the wind howling past his ears and the frantic pounding of his heart echoed in the air. Each passing second felt like a race against death itself. Would courage be enough to conquer fear, or would the price be too steep, burying everything in silence? Amidst the violent snowstorm, the hunter had but one choice left: face the challenge, or let everything vanish into eternal darkness. Step into this story with me, where every moment is a shock, where every decision could change everything, not just a life, but the very soul. Montana in the winter is unlike any other place. The snowstorm rages through, covering the fields with thick snow, erasing all traces of the paths once left behind by humans. A barren land, with nothing but snow and ice-covered mountains, where there is no life, only cold, quiet stillness. This is where Thomas McKenna came to find the peace he longed for, but it seems that even peace isn't meant for him. Thomas is a hunter, so here he found himself, where the snowstorm howls through every gap in his thick coat, sending piercing cold into his body with every gust. On his shoulder is a rifle, but in his eyes is a faint fire, not the fire of life, but the flicker of a soul that once burned bright in the past, now reduced to a faint smolder. He doesn't speak much, doesn't share with anyone. Day by day, he lives in his wounds, chewing on the painful memories of his past life. After years of living in bustling, noisy cities, Thomas decided to leave it all behind to search for peace in this place. He chose Montana, a place filled only with snowstorms and endless desolation. But does true peace really exist here, or is it just an illusion? I've found myself here, but what am I really searching for? With his thick coat, rifle slung over his shoulder, and rubber boots firmly planted on the snow-covered ground, Thomas trudges through the vast fields. Everything around him is white, snow and ice. The sun never appears during this winter. The sky is gray, only the sound of the wind howling, like a call from a world where loneliness never ends. The distant mountains are lost in the fog, and no creature can survive here except the howling snowstorms. Today's hunt is an opportunity for Thomas to find something in life. His goal is to hunt a deer, a simple task, but in his mind, there is something more he is searching for than just prey, perhaps redemption, a glimmer of hope. He doesn't want to think about his past, doesn't want to remember what he's lost. But the memories always haunt him, and even in these freezing winds, Thomas can't escape the pain of what he's lost. The snowstorm arrives quickly, just as Thomas begins his journey. He realizes he can no longer see the path ahead. Everything is blurry and uncertain. The storm engulfs the space around him, filling every void with cold and solitude. Snow falls heavily, and every step feels as though he's lost in a world with no escape. The cold wraps around him, and in that moment, he wonders if he's really living or just existing in the storm of his own life. There's nothing left to search for. Nothing but this death. Thomas can't remember how many times he's thought that, each time feeling the cold seep into his bones. It feels like there's no place left for him in this world. He is somewhere between life and death, and right now, amidst the snowstorm, he feels like he's losing his way. Suddenly, as the snowstorm grows fiercer and the snow thickens, a vague shape flickers in the snow, something moving through the thick snow. At first, Thomas thinks it's a broken tree, or just an illusion created by the storm. But as he gets closer, the shape begins to take form more clearly. It's not an inanimate object, but a living creature, a wild horse, strong yet struggling in the thin ice of a frozen lake. It's trapped, unable to escape, and in its eyes is utter desperation. The horse has a sleek black coat, but now it is soaked through with freezing water. Its hooves are stuck in the broken ice, preventing it from moving. The horse's eyes are wide with fear and exhaustion. It's fighting the freezing cold, but each time it struggles, the ice cracks more, and it sinks deeper into the water. Thomas can't walk away. He can't leave it. At this moment, he realizes that he can't live just for himself. He can't turn a blind eye to this creature's suffering, even though he knows that if he saves it, he might pay with his own life. Death is not an option for me, but I can't let it die alone. How can he save this horse when he's struggling to survive himself? The thin ice could crack at any moment, and if he's not careful, both of them will be swallowed up in the cold. But Thomas's heart doesn't allow him to leave. The memories of sacrifice, of those he's lost, have taught him that sometimes you have to face death to save the life of another. He steps forward, no longer hesitating. As he moved toward the horse, a strange yet powerful feeling stirred within him, a light blazing through the desperate darkness of his life. But at this moment, every decision, every thought, had only one purpose. The wind blew fiercely, carrying a blinding snowstorm that obscured Thomas's vision. Though he couldn't see clearly ahead, he pressed on, each step cutting through the bone-chilling cold. Suddenly, his eyes caught a strange shape in the distance, shattered against the white snow. At first, he thought it was some foreign object, maybe a broken tree or a chunk of rock from the storm. But as he approached, the shape began to reveal itself more clearly. A horse. A wild horse, powerful and full of life, but now motionless, trapped in the thin ice of a frozen lake. Thomas froze, his legs feeling as if they were frozen in place, unable to move. At that moment, the rushing wind and the howling snowstorm seemed to disappear around him. All he could hear was the horse's struggling breaths and the heavy fall of snow. Thomas couldn't believe his eyes. How could such a wild creature be trapped in a situation like this? He raised his hand to shield his face, his eyes stinging from the snow, but what he saw remained unchanged. The horse barely moved, lying in a desperate state, trying to drag itself free from the broken ice, but with each attempt, it sank deeper. He took a few steps forward, his heart pounding harder in his chest. This horse was not a prey, not the target he came to hunt. But the image of it, its large, bright eyes, full of fear and exhaustion, shook him to his core. Life and death were only a step apart, and here was a wild creature, a powerful being, now on the brink of collapse before him. The horse was large, strong, with a sleek black coat, now soaked through with icy water. Its long hairs clung to its body, covering the thick ice, creating strips of frozen water. However, what chilled Thomas to the bone the most were the horse's eyes. Wide open, filled with fear and despair, as if calling out to someone, not with words, but through its gaze. Thomas could see every breath the horse took, weak, heavy gasps, interspersed with shudders. The horse couldn't escape. Its hooves were trapped in the broken ice, unable to pull itself free. Every time it struggled, the ice cracked further, and the weight of its body only made the ice thinner, as if the storm wasn't just attacking the horse, but pushing it deeper into the abyss of death. Thomas stood at a distance, feeling the desperation in every movement of the horse. He could hear the sound of the ice cracking, the hooves hitting the cold water. The horse's weak breaths grew quieter, but each one struck his heart like a sharp blow. He realized there was no time to wait, no choice but to act immediately. The horse was slowly dying beneath the thin ice. The cold was taking over its muscles, weakening every movement, and its eyes were growing darker, as if it had accepted that it wouldn't escape. But just at that moment, Thomas felt something different. A spark of life, though faint, still remained in the horse. Something inside him couldn't accept that this life would slip away like this, that he couldn't let it die without trying. The wind blew through him, making him shiver, but his heart burned with resolve. He couldn't just stand by and watch the horse die. This wasn't an inanimate object he could disregard. It was a life that needed help, and if he didn't act, it would pass without anyone lifting a finger. The horse's resilience and courage had awakened something inside him, fueling a determination not to give up. Thomas looked around, seeing nothing but snow and ice, but he knew a decision had to be made, and he wouldn't back down. Thomas stood there, his heart pounding, but his mind was in turmoil. He could feel the tension between his mind and his heart. Everything pointed to the fact that saving this horse was a risky decision, perhaps even suicidal. The ice could break easily, and just one small mistake would cause him to be swallowed by the freezing water. Every step closer, every inch he moved, felt like a step toward death itself. The cold didn't just make his body tremble, it seeped deep into his mind. But in that moment, long-forgotten memories suddenly flooded back. He remembered the days on the battlefield, his comrades who had fought beside him. They were the ones who were always ready to sacrifice for one another, never abandoning a friend no matter how dire the circumstances. And now, standing before a life struggling against death, he couldn't help but reflect on what he had learned from them. If I walk away, I won't be like them, he thought. This inner conflict made Thomas's heart tighten. His mind told him to retreat, protect himself, save his own life. But the humanitarian part of him, the deepest part of his soul, wouldn't let him do that. He had been a soldier, had witnessed many losses, but he had never faced a situation like this. The horse was not a warrior on a battlefield but a wild creature, helpless before death. And he, a hunter, could not just stand by and abandon it. He couldn't discard what had made him who he was. The resilience of a soldier, the willingness to sacrifice for others, had become an inseparable part of his being. In this moment, even knowing that saving the horse could mean his own death, he couldn't turn away. The decision came slowly, but surely. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep into his bones. But his heart warmed, brightened by a new resolve. If I die, at least I'll die for a reason. He couldn't walk away, couldn't let this horse die in despair without doing anything. He looked into the horse's eyes, where life and death were separated by a thin thread. Those eyes seemed to call to him, not with words, but with the courage within them, a life, though exhausted, unwilling to give up. And Thomas knew, no matter how great the danger, he wouldn't let this horse die alone. He would save it. The decision had been made. There was no more time to hesitate, no way to turn back. Thomas, with his heart filled with resolve, would not let fear stop him. He knew that not only his own life, but also the life of the horse, was waiting for him. Every second that passed, every step he took, felt like a battle between life and death. Step by step, Thomas charged toward the horse. The thin ice beneath his feet seemed to resist, slipping with every step he took, making every movement a battle. The cold sliced through him, like needles stabbing into his skin. His hands were numb, almost unable to feel anything. His legs seemed frozen, stiffening from the frost of the winter. But the image of the horse's desperate eyes haunted him, as though it were calling to him, urging him to continue, even if the whole world wanted to stop. The wind howled, like a whip striking his face, making it impossible to open his eyes. Snow whipped around him, covering his body with thick layers of ice. But Thomas could not stop. Every gust of wind, every shiver, was a reminder of the task he had to complete. He looked at the horse, struggling against the broken ice. Each time the horse struggled, the ice grew weaker, and it got closer to death. He had to do something immediately, or it would all be over. Thomas had no rescue rope, no tools to help him pull the horse from this death trap. But he had one thing, his leather belt. He quickly ripped it off, his hands shaking from the cold, but his heart burned with an unshakable resolve. Even though he wasn't sure if the horse would understand, he still held on to hope. He extended the belt toward the horse, mouthing silent prayers in his heart. The horse, with its fearful eyes, didn't react right away. It shook its head, trying to break free from the ice, but couldn't. Time seemed to stand still in that tense moment, and Thomas could almost feel the desperation in every strand of the horse's mane. He moved the belt closer, and the horse grew weaker, but then, like a miracle, the horse finally understood. A heavy breath escaped, and in its ultimate exhaustion, the horse bit down on the belt. It felt like a spark of hope ignited within Thomas. He immediately pulled hard on the belt, using every last ounce of strength. But just as he felt a moment of success, the ice beneath his feet cracked again. His whole body seemed to fall into despair, but no, he couldn't stop. Death was approaching, but Thomas couldn't turn back. The horse had bitten down on the belt, and that was the last light in this darkness. Both of them, despite facing death, refused to give up. Everything happened too quickly. As Thomas was almost pulling the horse up from the ice, a horrific crack sounded beneath his feet. Before he could react, he felt himself being pulled into the freezing water, as if a powerful undertow had dragged him toward death. His entire body sank into the bone-chilling cold of the water, the sensation of thousands of icy needles piercing his veins, paralyzing him within seconds. The cold was so intense it felt as if it cut off his breath, causing everything around him to fade. He could feel his strength draining away, and every movement became a hopeless effort. In that moment of despair, his body seemed frozen, leaving only weak, labored breaths. His eyes were open, but all he could see was a blurry mist. The cold not only paralyzed his muscles but also took over his mind. With each passing second, his awareness seemed to dim, leaving only his heavy breathing and the absolute silence of death. Drowning in the freezing water, Thomas realized something he had never wanted to think about. He couldn't save himself. All his efforts were in vain. The exhaustion and the cold had nearly wiped away all his life force. He struggled, but his movements were weak and powerless. The darkness grew thicker around him, and in that moment, he could feel death drawing closer, cold and silent. All hope seemed to be extinguished. But then, in the midst of the thick darkness, something miraculous happened. A figure rushed toward him with unbelievable speed. The horse. The wild horse, exhausted and spent, but in that moment, still not giving up. Despite its own body being tortured by the cold, without hesitation, the horse plunged into the freezing water, pulling Thomas up. Thomas could hardly believe his eyes. The horse, now much weaker, still used its last bit of strength to pull him up. With all its resilience, the horse bit down on Thomas's coat and pulled him with all its might, dragging him from the water. With each pull, with every movement of the horse, there was an unimaginable perseverance. It wasn't just fighting for its own survival, it was fighting to save another life, Thomas's. Although the horse was struggling against the brutal cold, it didn't hesitate. Its body was shaking, every drop of icy water clinging to its fur, but it didn't give up. The pulls it made were long and full of effort, but there was no sign of weakness. The horse's eyes, staring into Thomas's, seemed to say it all, "I won't let you die." With every pull, Thomas felt a flicker of hope. He no longer had the strength to feel the pain, but the horse's unwavering actions were like a ray of light in the darkness. Each passing second, Thomas felt as though he was returning to the world, a world he thought he had lost. And then, after one final powerful pull, the horse had pulled Thomas from the water. When he was finally dragged onto the shore, a strange sensation filled him. He couldn't move, but he couldn't deny that he was still alive. The cold still gripped him, but life was slowly returning to his body. The horse, weak and panting, still stood there, not leaving his side. It didn't walk away. Unlike the wild horses who would typically run after escaping danger, this one stood firm, as though it knew its job was not yet done, that it couldn't leave while Thomas's life still hung in the balance. Thomas tried to open his eyes, but all he saw was a blurry mist. In the faint light, he could see the horse still standing beside him, its wild eyes filled with determination, as if to affirm that it wasn't just saving him, it was also saving itself. Both of them, though facing death, refused to give up. When Thomas was finally pulled from the freezing water, he felt a strange, unexplainable sensation. The cold did not leave his body, but within him, there arose an undeniable warmth. He lay there, utterly exhausted, feeling the cold waves still crashing against his body, but something deep inside him had changed. The wild horse, with all its remaining strength, had saved him, and that was not just a miracle. It was an incomprehensible act of sacrifice, one that Thomas never thought could happen, a sacrifice from a wild creature that knew nothing of friendship or loyalty. The horse, after battling the harsh cold to save Thomas, still stood there, not leaving. It did not walk away, even though it, too, was exhausted and near the point of collapse. Just moments ago, both of them had nearly lost their lives, but in that moment, Thomas realized that his life was no longer as simple as it once was. He had survived not just because of himself, but because of the horse, because of a friendship that he could no longer deny. Thomas gazed into the horse's eyes, eyes that were wild yet resilient, no longer showing fear or loneliness. Those eyes, now filled with understanding, this horse not only saved his life but also became a companion, a warrior who had helped him face countless struggles. He didn't need words, nor any explanation. What they shared was a connection deeper than any words could express. A wild creature like this horse could sacrifice itself for someone like him. And in that moment, Thomas couldn't help but think about what had happened. The horse had chosen to stay by his side, not abandoning him, even after saving its own life. In his heart, Thomas felt a sensation he had never felt before, a feeling of peace, a bond that words could not describe. The horse was no longer just a wild animal, it was a true friend. He had never had anyone stand by his side, helping him in such life or death moments. Their relationship was no longer a simple one of owner and pet. This was friendship, an unwavering friendship without barriers, without distinction. Though Thomas was still weak, his body numb from the cold, in his heart, thoughts of past loneliness no longer existed. He no longer felt lost in this world, even though the path ahead would be full of challenges and trials. The horse stood there, panting, its eyes still fixed on Thomas, as if saying, "We'll walk this path together." And that was something Thomas had never felt from anyone in his life, a presence of resilience, without promises, simply being there for each other. The horse, despite having faced brutal battles with the snowstorm, despite being on the brink of death, refused to give up. It didn't leave Thomas alone while both of them faced danger. This was something Thomas had never imagined. A wild creature, born to live free, could form such a bond with him. Wild horses typically don't need human help, but this horse, with every step it took, was proving to Thomas that friendship could transcend all boundaries. This horse had not only saved him but had also given him a priceless gift: resilience, loyalty, and a relationship that could change his life forever. In that moment, Thomas knew everything had changed. No longer was he a lonely hunter. No longer was he lost in the cold world around him. He now had a friend, a companion that couldn't be replaced. Their bond was no longer just about being saved. It was about trust, about understanding without words, between two souls, without the distinctions of master and pet, without the difference between human and animal. The horse, though tired and nearly out of strength, still stood resolutely beside Thomas. It didn't need to understand his words, but it understood that, right now, they could not be apart. The horse had not only saved him but had also given him part of its own strength and resilience. Every step Thomas took was lighter now, the warmth from the horse giving him strength. He looked at the horse, no longer feeling fear or loneliness. They had survived the storm, but the true challenges still lay ahead. The wind howled stronger than ever before. The snow whirled around, tearing apart the space ahead of them. Thomas and the horse were exhausted, but they didn't stop. Every step they took felt like a battle, with every gust of wind striking them like a whip, testing both their bodies and their minds to the breaking point. But in the midst of that biting cold, within the swirling white mist of snow, they didn't feel alone. Because they had each other. The cold seemed determined to defeat them, pushing them into despair. But no, they wouldn't give up. Thomas looked into the horse's eyes, eyes that now held not just wildness, but deep trust. The horse pressed on, its strong legs moving forward, still marching on despite exhaustion. Every step it took was a declaration that they would overcome everything, that they would not quit, no matter how long the road ahead seemed. Thomas felt each step of his own become lighter with the horse by his side. Although his body ached, his legs barely able to keep moving, he found strength in the horse's gaze. They were companions, warriors of their own fate, facing every trial not just with physical strength, but with the spiritual bond they had forged along the way, with trust and determination. The storm still raged, but with each step they took, Thomas felt like they were slowly conquering it. It wasn't about easily overcoming the storm, but about achieving something neither of them had believed possible, finding strength in companionship, in the newfound friendship between man and animal. The horse was no longer just a pet, and Thomas was no longer a lonely man. They were friends, fighting side by side. Each gust of wind seemed to push them back, but they never stopped. They pressed on with resilience, step by painful step. Thomas felt warmth rising inside him as he realized something. Life wasn't just about survival, it was about connections. The horse hadn't given up on him, and now, Thomas would never give up on the horse. Finally, after a long journey filled with struggles and trials, as they pushed through the freezing winds, the dim light of a house appeared in the distance. A cozy home, with smoke rising from the chimney, stood against the backdrop of the snow-covered landscape, like a miracle. Thomas no longer felt the loneliness he had before. His and the horse's steps, now, were no longer a fight against death. They had found shelter, a home not just to escape the storm, but to find peace within. The horse, once a wild creature, once independent and free, had now become the loyal companion Thomas needed. Together, they had braved the storm, and now, they had found their refuge. No more loneliness, no more despair. The friendship between Thomas and the horse had been tested, and now, it was stronger than ever. As they stood in front of the warm home, Thomas and the horse's eyes met once more. No words were needed, no explanations. Everything was clear. They had faced everything together. This friendship would last forever, not only in their hearts but in every step they would take from here on out. Looking back on his journey, Thomas realized that the story between him and the horse was not just a fight for survival, but a testament to boundless sacrifice and the connection between humans and animals. The horse, once a wild creature unaware of friendship, loyalty, or sacrifice, saved his life. It didn't just rescue him in that moment of despair, but also taught him valuable lessons about patience and selflessness. Their story is a reminder that true friendship is not just about helping in a time of need, but about a deep spiritual connection, trust, and resilience in the face of every challenge. Why didn't the horse leave after saving him? Was it out of gratitude, or was it a spiritual bond neither of them could explain? The horse's eyes were no longer just wild. They now held a look of deep understanding, as if it knew that its purpose was not only to save Thomas but to become a companion, facing greater trials together. No words, no explanations, just the gaze of the horse spoke volumes. The friendship between Thomas and the horse was not merely a favor exchanged, it was an emotional exchange, a harmony that only those who have endured hardship together can truly understand. They survived together, and now, they continued their journey, not just to find safety, but to discover the true values of life, friendship, sacrifice, and resilience. This story doesn't end with a perfect conclusion, but rather opens up bigger questions about life, friendship, and sacrifice. Thomas and the horse were not just two beings fighting for survival, they were two souls bonded by an unbreakable friendship. This friendship wasn't just about saving each other in a moment of danger, but about a relationship forged in resilience, courage, and sacrifice. The bond between man and horse proved that the connection between humans and animals can transcend any limits. The horse not only saved Thomas's life but also taught him that life isn't just about surviving, it's about the relationships we build, the profound connections that can't always be explained logically. Their friendship went beyond a typical relationship. It wasn't dependency, but a deep commitment, a partnership in every circumstance. The end of this story doesn't just mark the completion of a journey. It's a reminder of the value of genuine friendship in this world. In a world full of challenges and uncertainties, friendship doesn't just help us overcome hardships, but teaches us about courage and selflessness. Thomas and the horse have given us a lesson in love, resilience, and the power of never giving up on each other, no matter the challenges. And perhaps, this is the profound message the story wants to convey. True relationships and real friendship can change our lives. We may not know the trials ahead, but one thing is certain, if we trust and walk alongside one another, we can overcome anything.